when the brain shouldn't be thinking anymore for centuries. Consciousness has been treated as something simple. When the brain is active, the mind exists. When the brain shuts down, consciousness disappears. This assumption became one of the foundations of modern neuroscience, but in recent decades, something deeply unsettling has begun to appear inside brain scanners. Patterns that should not exist, signals that should not persist, coherence where there should be chaos or nothing at all. The first shock came from patients who were declared clinically dead. In several documented cases, brain activity did not immediately collapse into silence after cardiac arrest. Instead, researchers observed brief but highly organized bursts of neural activity, patterns associated not with confusion, but with heightened awareness. These were not random electrical sparks. They were structured, coordinated, and disturbingly similar to patterns seen during conscious thought. According to classical neuroscience, this should not happen. Without oxygen, neurons fail rapidly. Within seconds, organized brain activity should dissolve. Yet in these scans, the brain appeared to synchronize. Some researchers describe the activity as resembling deep meditation or intense focus. Others notice gamma wave bursts, the same frequencies associated with memory integration, perception, and conscious experience. This raised a dangerous question. If consciousness is purely a byproduct of biological function, why would it briefly intensify as biology collapses? The anomaly did not stop there. In comatose patients, individuals diagnosed as being in a vegetative state, advanced brain imaging revealed something even more disturbing. When asked to imagine specific actions, such as playing tennis or walking through a familiar place, their brains responded exactly as if they were awake. The body showed no response, no movement, no speech. But inside the scanner, the brain lit up with deliberate, organized activity. These patients were not reacting randomly. They were understanding, responding, choosing. According to outward observation, they were unconscious. According to their brains, they were not. This shattered one of the most basic assumptions in medicine, that lack of response equals lack of awareness. It suggested that consciousness could persist even when every external sign says it is gone. As brain imaging technology became more precise, more anomalies emerged. In patients with severe brain damage, cases where entire regions were destroyed, scans revealed compensatory networks forming in ways never predicted by textbooks. Instead of collapsing, the brain reorganized itself. Conscious experience appeared to continue using alternate pathways. This adaptability alone was remarkable. But what truly unsettled scientists was how coherent the activity remained. Not fragmented, not degraded, but structured. It was as if consciousness was not tied to a single location in the brain, but distributed, resilient, and difficult to extinguish. One neurologist famously remarked that the brain, under extreme conditions, behaves less like a machine and more like a system trying to preserve something essential, something not easily defined. This led to a growing divide within neuroscience. One side argued these scans represent unknown biological mechanisms, complex, but still purely physical. The other side asked a far more uncomfortable question. What if consciousness is not produced by the brain, but filtered by it? In this view, the brain does not create awareness the way a generator produces electricity. It shapes Italiano, limits Italiano, channels Italiano. And when the brain begins to fail, those limits may loosen, allowing strange, unexpected patterns to emerge. This idea was once dismissed as philosophical speculation. Now, it appears inside medical data. Brain scans that refuse to behave as expected. Consciousness appearing where it should not exist. Awareness persisting where biology says it should be gone. These are not fringe claims. They are documented anomalies, and they force us to confront a possibility science has long avoided. The mind may not be as tightly bound to the brain as we once believed. This does not mean consciousness is supernatural, but it may be more fundamental than biology alone can explain. And this is only the beginning, because the next category of brain scans doesn't just show awareness persisting. It suggests consciousness behaving independently of physical structure. When consciousness remains, even as the brain fails. If the first anomalous brain scans were unsettling, the next group was deeply disturbing. They showed not just fleeting awareness, but sustained. Coherent consciousness in brains that should not have been capable of supporting it. In patients with massive brain damage, entire regions responsible for language, memory, or sensory integration were visibly according to classical neuroscience, these individuals should have lost complex awareness permanently, but brain scans told a different story. Instead of silence, researchers observed organized neural networks rerouting activity through unexpected regions. Areas previously considered secondary or inactive began coordinating in ways that mimicked normal conscious processing. This wasn't random compensation. It was structured adaptation. The brain appeared to reorganize itself around the damage, preserving awareness even when its original architecture was gone. One neurologist described it as watching consciousness refuse to shut down. Even more shocking were scans taken from patients in deep coma or minimally conscious states. Externally, these individuals showed no purposeful movement, no speech, no reliable response to stimuli. Many were assumed to be unaware, but when placed inside advanced functional MRI scanners, something remarkable happened. When researchers asked these patients to imagine specific actions like playing tennis or navigating their own homes, the same brain regions activated as in healthy, conscious volunteers. The patterns were not vague. They were precise, repeatable, intentional. The patients were not reacting reflexively. They were understanding instructions and choosing how to respond entirely within their own minds. In some cases, this internal communication became so reliable that researchers were able to ask yes or no questions and receive correct answers based solely on brain activity. No movement, no speech, just thought. This shattered the idea that consciousness requires outward expression. It suggested something far more unsettling. Awareness can exist silently, trapped inside a body that cannot respond. And if that is true, then consciousness is not dependent on behavior. It exists independently of how it is expressed. As these findings accumulated, neuroscientists began noticing another anomaly. In patients near death, brain scans sometimes showed sudden increases in coherence and synchronization across distant regions, moments before complete shutdown. Instead of a gradual fade into disorder, the brain briefly organized itself at a higher level. This was the opposite of what biology predicted. Under oxygen deprivation, neural activity should fragment, energy failure should produce chaos. Instead, the brain seemed to enter a final, unified state. Some researchers compared it to a system pulling itself together. One last attempt at integration. Others were more cautious, but admitted the phenomenon was real. And it wasn't isolated. These coherent patterns appeared across different patients, different hospitals, and different scanning technologies. The implication was impossible to ignore. Consciousness did not degrade smoothly as the brain failed. In some cases, it intensified. This raised a deeply uncomfortable question. What if the brain is not the source of consciousness, but a limiter? Under normal conditions, neural structures constrain awareness, keeping it focused, localized, and filtered. But when those structures break down, something else emerges, something less constrained. This idea is controversial, but it is no longer purely philosophical. It is grounded in data. Brain scans showing awareness without responsiveness, intentional thought without behavior, coherence without structural support. None of this fits neatly into existing models. Some scientists argue that we are simply missing key mechanisms, undiscovered biological processes that will eventually explain everything. Others suggest a more radical possibility. Consciousness may be a fundamental property of reality, not produced by matter, but interacting with it. In this view, the brain is not the generator of the mind. It is an interface. Damage the interface, and the signal changes, but does not necessarily disappear. This would explain why consciousness can persist despite massive neural loss. It would explain why awareness can exist without expression, and it would explain why brain scans sometimes reveal clarity at the edge of death. But this idea carries enormous consequences. If consciousness is not created by the brain, then death may not be the end of awareness, only the end of its physical expression. Science does not claim this is true, but science can no longer dismiss it outright. The data refuses to cooperate. Each anomalous scan pushes the boundary further, forcing researchers to admit something uncomfortable. We understand the brain far better than we understand the mind, and the final category of scans pushes this mystery even further. Because some brains don't just show persistent consciousness, they show activity that appears decoupled from physical structure altogether. When consciousness seems to exist without a brain up to this point, the anomalies have been disturbing, but still tethered to biology. Damaged brains, failing brains, dying brains. Yet, the final category of anomalous brain scans crosses a line science was never prepared to face. Scans where consciousness appears to persist without any identifiable neurological mechanism capable of producing it. In some rare but well-documented cases, patients with severe hydrocephalus were found to be living normal, functional lives despite having dramatically reduced brain tissue. In extreme examples, imaging revealed that up to 90% of the cranial cavity was filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The remaining neural tissue was compressed into a thin layer against the skull. According to every known model of neuroscience, these individuals should not be conscious, let alone intelligent. And yet, they were. They held jobs, maintained relationships, demonstrated memory, reasoning, and self-awareness. Brain scans confirmed the anatomical damage. The mind, however, refused to comply. This phenomenon stunned neurologists. Consciousness appeared to function with a fraction of the neural hardware believed necessary to support it. No redundancy, no hidden reserve, no alternative explanation that fully accounted for the observations. The brain, it seemed, was no longer acting as the source of consciousness, but as something else entirely. Then came reports from near-death research. In several clinical cases, patients who were fully unconscious with flat or near-flat IG readings later described vivid, structured experiences during periods when measurable brain activity was minimal or absent. These accounts were not vague dreams. They included accurate descriptions of medical procedures, conversations, and events that occurred while the patient was clinically unresponsive. When cross-checked against medical records, some details matched precisely. This presented a paradox. If consciousness requires neural activity, how could awareness persist when measurable activity was gone? Skeptics argue that residual brain activity may exist below detection thresholds, or that memories formed before or after unconsciousness are reconstructed retroactively. These explanations may account for some cases, but not all, because in certain instances, the timing and accuracy of the reported experiences do not align with known neurological processes, and the brain scans associated with these cases offer no easy answers. In another category of anomalies, researchers observed coherent brainwave patterns appearing in isolated neural tissue. Under controlled laboratory conditions, small clusters of neurons demonstrated synchronized activity resembling organized processing, even when disconnected from larger brain networks. This does not prove consciousness, but it suggests something unsettling. Complex, coordinated patterns can emerge without centralized control, which leads to a radical question. Is consciousness localized or distributed? If awareness does not depend on a specific structure, if it can persist with minimal neural support, then the brain may not be the sole seat of the mind. Some theorists propose that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, similar to space, time, or energy. In this framework, the brain does not generate consciousness. It tunes into it, like a radio receiving a signal. Damage the radio, and the signal becomes distorted. But the broadcast continues. This idea was once dismissed as metaphysical. Now, it appears uncomfortably compatible with certain data. Brain scans showing awareness without responsiveness, functioning minds without sufficient neural mass. Experiences reported when brain activity should be impossible. None of this proves consciousness exists beyond the brain. But it proves something equally important. Our current models are incomplete. Neuroscience has mapped regions, networks, and correlations with extraordinary precision. But correlation is not causation. We know where activity happens. We still don't know why experience arises at all. The anomalous brain scans force us to confront a possibility science has long resisted. Consciousness may not emerge solely from complexity. It may not be reducible to neurons firing. It may be something the brain interacts with, rather than creates. This does not mean science has failed. It means it has reached a boundary, and boundaries are where the most important discoveries occur. Every major shift in scientific understanding began with anomalies that refused to disappear. These brain scans may represent such a moment. They do not tell us what consciousness is, but they tell us what it might not be. Not fragile, not easily extinguished, not strictly confined to structure, and that realization changes everything. If consciousness is more fundamental than biology alone, then questions about life, death, identity, and reality itself must be re-examined. The mystery is no longer philosophical, it is empirical. Recorded, scanned, measured, and unresolved. If you want to keep exploring the edge where real science collides with the unknown, where data challenges certainty and reality becomes less solid than we imagined, subscribe to SeventhMyst. Because some mysteries aren't hiding in the universe, they're happening inside us.